There is a moment when the sacred breaks without warning, like a mirror that shatters the most beloved reflection. You feel it in your chest, don't you? Something tightened, and you fell silent, because pain happens in silence, in the shadow of a relationship that was once a pure promise of affection. When the child you bore to heal your wounds raises his voice in humiliation, the whole inner temple collapses. It is as if what was most intimate, the bond that should embrace, turned against. You demanding an invisible ancestral debt that was never paid, because it was never symbolized. If this kind of reflection truly touches you, perhaps this is your place. Consider subscribing to the channel. Carl Jung asserted that every unconscious behavior is the psyche's attempt to restore a lost balance, even if this comes at the expense of the love that should unite. The child's humiliation of the mother, then, is not reduced to a gratuitous gesture of disrespect. It is the clear symptom of an emotional tie that was never symbolically separated. Within this dynamic, the mother holds the child as a living extension of her own being, unaware that by doing so, she annihilates herself. And when this inner space is lacking, the child unconsciously begins to seek autonomy by the rawest means, aggression, coldness, or humiliation, as a desperate cry to say, "I exist beyond you." Jordan Peterson teaches that when the mother fails to set clear symbolic boundaries, the child grows up helpless, without internal structure, and later the guilt of that lack returns to her in the form of emotional aggression. It is a vicious circle. The absence of boundaries feeds insecurity, which germinates into rebellion and turns against the one who should embrace. In this video, we will reveal this harsh yet liberating truth about why children disrespect, attack, or humiliate their mothers, and what this behavior reveals about the family unconscious and the unprotected feminine soul. Have you noticed how in many moments of calm, that ancient emptiness still echoes inside you, that unheeded cry for help? It is the voice of the boy who was once your everything and who now demands to be born separate, even if it means wounding. And it is precisely in that wound, laid bare by humiliation, that we find the map of healing. To understand what went unsaid, to name what was silenced, to reclaim the body and soul scattered in anticipation of a love that was not contained. Over the next few minutes, we will dive into this archetypal abyss, guided by symbols and images that speak directly to the unconscious. We will understand why the child humiliates, but also why this gesture, however cruel, carries a plea for separation, a plea for you to stand up, full in your identity, relearn to say no, and above all, to exist for yourself again. It is a path that demands courage. There are no easy promises, only the profound truth that flows in the silence between mother and child, in the space where words have always arrived late. It is an invitation to look within, without judgment, with compassion for the woman who gave everything and got lost in the act of giving. Prepare yourself then to rediscover yourself, to see reflected in the other's pain the image of your own wounded yet intact soul. Here we begin the process of reintegration of what was fragmented, and, in that act of presence, a new form of bond may be born, founded on autonomy and mutual respect. There is an almost imperceptible movement that begins in the home's silence when the mother, out of old pain or unresolved guilt, decides to deposit in the child all the meaning of her existence. You feel the weight of that abandonment of yourself, as if each of his smiles were the very breath you dare not interrupt. In many cases, the dedication exceeds a healthy limit and overflows into an unconscious demand. The child is revealed as the absolute center, as the axis around which the maternal universe revolves. Unaware, the mother offers the boy an altar with no return, and with each gesture of love he receives, he also bears a burden that does not belong to him. Many mothers, out of pain, guilt, or emotional emptiness, turn the child into their sense of life. The child who grows up as the center of the mother's soul unconsciously comes to hate her for it. He feels he carries an emotional burden that is not his, and reacts with coldness, anger, or humiliation. The mother, unaware, abandoned herself, and the child feels forced to be God for her. Every inversion of roles exacts a high price later. When the child feels he carries within him the responsibility of healing wounds that are not his, a deep tension is born between the desire to care and the desire to flee. You sense that echo in your own story, don't you? as if you carried winter in your chest even on sunny days. The boy, living under that shadow, learns to confuse love with obligation and care with demand. Each maternal gesture is received with gratitude and at the same time with silent resentment, a calculated resentment by a heart that yearns for the freedom to exist without guilt. In adolescence, this conflict intensifies. The young person who felt placed on an accusing throne starts to react with coldness or rebellion. He unconsciously sees that the mother does not live for herself and uses this realization as justification to attack the bond that drowns him. It is in this phase that affection can turn into acid reproval, advice into accusation, and an embrace into an instrument of control. Have you ever heard his aggressive silence? That silence hurt more than 1,000 screams. Within, the mother begins to wonder where that childhood complicity went. She recalls moments when simply being together was enough and realizes that, instead of nurturing a healthy relationship, she created a field of emotional tension. It is at this point that the maternal soul fragments. She splits between feeling useless and feeling threatened by the very fruit of her womb. The inversion of roles proclaims itself, and the altar built with so much sacrifice collapses, exposing the open wound of a love without borders. But in that abyss, there is an invitation to reunion. The mother can begin to rediscover her inner voice, the one buried by the role of infallible provider. She needs to allow herself to feel anger, fatigue, and longing for herself, without guilt, but with compassion. Recognizing that her value does not depend on the child's smile or approval is the first step to disarm the destructive dynamic. After all, when she rescues her identity, she offers the boy the deepest lesson, that every human being is born to walk on their own. In this process of reclamation, the mother ceases to be a reflection and becomes a mirror, a faithful, honest reflection, without masks. And by reflecting her integrity, she teaches the child that to exist means to assume limits, confront shadows, and above all, honor one's own soul, each one their own. Only then can the cry of humiliation give way to an intimate dialogue of mutual recognition, where mother and child learn to exist side by side without occupying each other's place. There is an invisible weight in love that imprisons, a density that manifests in acts of excessive care, as if each maternal gesture were a tight knot on the other's freedom. Have you noticed how affection can weigh like lead when there is no room for the other's own desire? Jung named this pattern the Great Dark Mother. It is the archetype that, without malicious intent, entangles the child in a suffocating web of protection, leaving him with no space to grow on his own. It is a love that paradoxically annihilates. Jung calls the archetype of the Great Dark Mother the maternal figure that unknowingly imprisons with the excess of presence. This archetype appears in mothers who live for the child and nullify their own desires, projecting onto them the meaning of their own existence. The child, then, cannot free himself without aggression, and humiliation appears as a way to break the symbiotic tie. It is cruel, but it is psychic, and if not understood, the pattern repeats in future generations. Do you feel in every word the weight of that bond? It is like carrying a dormant silk veil over your own heart, preventing it from beating naturally. At first, the attitude seems a gesture of pure love, the lunch prepared. Early, the choices of courses directed by the mother's eyes, the hand gripped at every corner of life, but that care becomes a trap when it kills the possibility of error, of falling, of learning. The boy, overnourished, discovers early that his worth depends on the smile that rescues the mother from anguish, and thus is born the silent debt. Each of his achievements pays a price in the autonomy that was never granted to him. In that field of shackles, the child's shadow awakens. Have you noticed how a certain coldness, a certain harshness in his gaze seems more like the cry of an internal prison than a personal insult? In this context, humiliation is the blade that severs the symbiotic tie. It is the only gesture that makes the mother step back, create space within herself. When the child humiliates, he draws from the bond what has always been missing, a clear boundary. He needs to break the knot to exist as another. And what he makes her feel, however painful, is the truth of the void that grew between them. It is at this moment that an internal turn appears, an echo that shakes the maternal heart. I allowed my love to be a trap. Have you noticed this in some moment of silence? It is as if the world of before collapses, and with it, the image of the woman you constructed. There is an intense upheaval, but also a seed of liberation. When the mother recognizes the dark archetype inhabiting her care, she opens a crack for healing. If this resonated with you in any way, leave a like. It shows that these conversations are necessary. By accepting her own need for space and desire, the mother makes a gesture of reverence to the child's life and to her own life. She learns to say no, not with rigidity, but with the loving clarity of one who loves without losing herself. And this no is not an act of rejection, but of affirmation of each one's genuine existence. In that movement, the maternal presence becomes a mirror of freedom, and the child, freed from the weight of emotional debt, can plant firmer roots in his own inner soil. The archetypal shadow that once seemed an inescapable force becomes a warning sign, an invitation for the mother to rediscover her desires, her will, her voice. When she reconnects with her humanity, she ceases to be a safe harbor only for the children and returns to navigate the ocean of herself. And it is in that navigation that the symbiotic bond, once suffocating, finds a new form, no longer of possession, but of respectful companionship, where each person occupies their place in the world without invading the other's space. There is a truth that tears the soul when revealed. The humiliation the child inflicts does not arise from gratuitous hatred, but from a deep cry for autonomy. You feel that cry, even if it echoes in the form of insult or cutting silence. Behind the disdain, there is a psychic yearning to spread one's wings, to discover that there is life beyond maternal warmth. It is a paradoxical anger that pulses like an urgency to be born for oneself. When the mother does not establish symbolic boundaries that teach the child the contour of his own autonomy, he grows trapped in a tie that clings to the skin, suffocating the bloom of his own self. Humiliation, then, reveals itself as a gesture of escape. By wounding the mother, the child seeks to create space, to fling open the distance necessary to exist apart. Have you ever noticed, in a moment of silence, how the insult carries with it an unconscious invitation to distance? It is as if the boy says, "Acknowledge me as another, give me the air I lack." Perceiving this dynamic demands courage to face what seems cruelty, but is in reality the expression of a deep wound. The child tries to say, "See me as a man," but only knows how to do so by attacking the wounded feminine that sustains him. In that gesture, the mother confronts her own difficulty in letting go, in allowing the departure. Each harsh word he utters mirrors her fear of being abandoned, and it is in that mirror that the learning for both resides. Do you feel the knot in your stomach when you recall his distant gaze? It is the reflection of a soul seeking passage. Instead of viewing the insults merely as an attack, imagine them as arrows seeking to break an invisible prison. In that instant, the mother realizes that kind words alone are not enough to free the child. It is necessary to allow falls, to let him flap his wings in the wind, even if, one day, he returns covered in scratches. Psychic separation occurs in the space where love becomes a boundary, and the boundary, although it seems harsh, carries compassion. When the mother accepts the pain of seeing the child depart, she assumes her own inner power, the power to exist for herself. In that gesture, the child finds the model of an upright man who does not deny his own scars, but walks on. Repetition with intention. He humiliates to separate. He wounds himself to differentiate. He screams to be born again. In that rhythm of repetition, we realize that each aggressive act is a bar of liberation. Have you felt that bar inside you, beating to a rhythm that seems impossible to follow? It is the soul's pulse in search of itself. By looking at this truth, the mother does not surrender to martyrdom, but awakens to the archetypal force of the inner father, the one who symbolizes space and law, the one who teaches the child to stand on his own. She need not renounce tenderness. She must cultivate it so that care becomes a bridge, not a wall. This understanding demands reflection, not a pious piece of advice, but deep listening. The mother listens to her own anger, recognizes her fear of losing the child, faces her inner voices that whisper guilt, and as she welcomes all those voices, she creates the internal ground where the child can plant his seed of independence. In the psychic dance between mother and child, Each act of humiliation announces a new bar. It is the counterpoint that creates melody in the family symphony. When the mother dances along without trying to silence the raw sound of pain, but welcoming its intensity, she will offer the child the cadence he seeks, a rhythm of separation and possible return, of autonomy and reconciliation. This is the archetypal invitation of this chapter, to look at aggression not as an end, but as the beginning of a movement of freedom. It is to plunge into the core of pain, to discover its sacred meaning. And in that plunge, mother and child can rediscover the dance of life, where each occupies their place, in mutual respect and renewed love. There is a moment when the mother, tired of waiting for recognition, realizes that continuing to offer excessive love only keeps alive the rebellious child within her son. You still feel the echo of endless attempts to win affection through unceasing acts of care, the dinner prepared in advance, the loving morning message, the constant offering of advice. All this, however, only feeds the child's internal belief that his value depends on saving the mother. Stopping this cycle does not mean closing one's heart, but silencing the whirlwind of guilt that compels her to give until exhaustion. In the space that emerges when the compulsive force of giving is interrupted, an identity separate from the role of eternal nurturer begins to germinate. The woman finally recovers the right to feel thirst, to have desires that will not be quenched by another's approval. This thirst, once perceived as a transgression of maternal care, reveals itself as a source of renewal for her own soul. By drinking from her own aura, the mother reignites the internal flame that ceased to exist under the weight of the eternal commission to heal all ills. On this journey, re-establishing symbolic boundaries is more than drawing frontiers around the child's gestures. It is sketching on the soul a contour that says, "There is in me a realm of my own, and in it dwells the child I once was." It is not about imposing rigidity, but about communicating clearly that she will no longer become a receptacle for the shadows he tries to project. Instead of anguishing over every harsh word, the mother learns to welcome her own tone of voice and the just silence that arises when she positions herself on her inner throne. That strength you may have denied, the strength to say no without regret, awakens like a sleeping lion. When the mother dares to trace that boundary, slow and tender, she teaches the child that to exist is not only to receive, but also to respect the other's space. And it is in the reverberation of that respect that the internal rebel child finds a different echo, the echo of a pilot who guides without paralyzing. The firm yet welcoming presence makes clear the deepest lesson of all. True love does not confuse itself with unconditional service. Allow yourself in those moments to resume practices that nourish your essence. A moment of silence at dawn, a book that sparks your inspiration, the reunion with friends who see you beyond the role of mother, not as an escape, but as a celebration of what is most sacred in you. By reconnecting with your vital spark, the woman sends the child the signal that her own inner life has priority, and upon seeing this gesture, the child discovers a new pattern, the pattern of a mother who does not lose herself in love, but who strengthens herself in caring for herself. In this practical awakening, the maternal soul pulses again as fertile ground where both can grow. She does not cease to be a safe harbor, but transforms the harbor into an island that invites the other to dock without sinking in its waters. The woman who reclaims her throne within her own soul teaches, without words, that she will no longer be a battlefield for unresolved wars. In the clarity of that inner embrace, mother and child finally find the respect that springs when each answers their own calling from within out. There is a moment when the mother, placed on the altar of devotion, recognizes the unbearable weight of being elevated above her own ground. You feel this in your body, as if the air is missing when you reach out to touch yourself. For so long, living on the altar meant accepting the martyrdom of hiding desires, of concealing pains and longings under veils of perfection. The imposed sanctity became a glass prison, beautiful, admired, but brittle, and when the structure collapses, the fall exposes a lacerated soul, eager to reclaim contact with her own inner ground. Imagine this woman descending, slow, hesitant, but determined. The sacrificial dress tears into 1,000 pieces, and the body, once imprisoned in divine form, reveals the vulnerable, pulsating flesh. You feel the beats of that heart that begins to have its own rhythm again, unmarked by the pace of external expectation. Each step she takes toward the ground is an act of courage, an abandonment of the mantle of idealization. On that path of descent, the mother rediscovers herself, the woman who played in the rain, who wanted to dance at midnight, and who wrote letters without addressees. For centuries, the mother was seen as a saint, and the child as a divine heir. That image became the standard, an unattainable model of unconditional love that demanded total renunciation. But no woman survives living on the altar. One day she breaks. This break, though painful, is the crack that lets the light in. When the myth's crystallinity shatters, the mother feels her body and soul breathe for the first time. It is the reunion with imperfection that makes us human. Strength lies not in idealization, but in the recognition of one's own fractures. The woman who descends from the pedestal, who assumes her wounds, limits, and desires, finally becomes human and free. If you know another woman who needs to hear this message of strength and rebirth, share this video as a gesture of sisterhood. In that act of sharing, something profound happens. The collective energy rises, and every woman who witnesses this metaphor activates in herself the right to liberate from the self-imposed altar. The metaphor becomes a bridge between souls, an invitation for each to see herself reflected in the fall, and in the fall to rediscover her own power to rise. It is a silent but transformative process, in which simply allowing oneself to feel makes a whole field of possibilities vibrate. Respect is not born from idealization, it is born from integral presence. When the mother, finally human, speaks of her scars without ceremony, she teaches the child to look at his own marks with compassion. The boy, witness to this act of courage, sees that strength is not unattainable, but born from the recognition of vulnerability. And the child, upon seeing the real mother, may for the first time bow before the strength he once despised. It is at that moment that the cycle of humiliation can transform into reverence, not for lost sanctity, but for revealed truth. Reverence based on mutual acceptance, on the recognition that mother and child are distinct bodies and souls, capable of loving without merging their existences. In this symbolic image, we find the possibility of a new bond, a bond forged on the solid ground of shared humanity. Mother and child walk together, not with the mother elevated on a throne, but side by side, treading the same stones of life. In that walk, each step echoes in the other's heart, and the harsh truth of humiliation gives way to the gentle melody of respect. There is a sacred, almost always silent, instant in which the mother feels the ancient pulse of her own womb reverberate in her soul. It is like a soft echo that says, "Here I am whole again." When she turns inward, she abandons the role of eternal nurturer and reappears as a complete woman. You feel that rebirth, like the night's chill yielding to the dawn's warmth. It is in that space, between the fall and the rising, that the possible reunion makes itself present. Carl Jung said that the child is born not only from the mother's body, but from her soul. And if that soul does not mature, he remains trapped in eternal childhood. This phrase resonates like an ancient bell, calling attention to the point where personal myth confuses with real life. Have you noticed in a moment of solitude that the cycle of the child's humiliation does not cease until the mother reclaims the protagonism of her own narrative? Each act of aggression carries within it the silent plea, "Mother, return to yourself." Clarissa Pinkola Estes teaches that the woman who returns to herself, even if late, awakens a new lineage. She stops being an eternal nurturer and becomes a living ancestor. Imagine a tree whose roots were dry, now saturated by the resurgence of sap. That tree grows and sustains not only its own branches, but also the underground roots that will give rise to other lives. When the mother reconnects with her inner power, her wounds, her desires, and her aspirations, she propels the child to emerge as a complete man, ready to align his own roots. The child who humiliates is asking unknowingly for the mother to stop disappearing. This humiliation, however cruel, is an invitation, an archetypal call for the woman to withdraw and resurge in her authentic strength. Did you feel that weight in your chest when you realized that no matter how much love you gave, it would never be enough until there was authenticity? And it is precisely this suffering which, when interpreted with compassion, becomes a portal of transformation. When the mother returns whole to her own soul, the child is invited to become a man, not a mirror of her pain. Think of the butterfly's metamorphosis. The chrysalis must break, the cocoon must shatter for the wings to open. The mother who heals herself breaks the cocoon of the suffocating bond, freeing the child to fly with autonomy. In that flight, he discovers there is a vast sky beyond the reach of the maternal shadow, and in it he finds not possessive protection, but the reference of a love that respects another's space. Healing begins when the woman stops expecting gratitude and begins demanding respect. Not as an imposition, but as a sacred presence. She learns that true respect springs from mutual recognition, not from emotional debt. Have you noticed how the sensation of being seen in your entirety, with flaws, desires, and limits, brings deep relief? This is the foundation of a new bond. A bond that does not suffer in the void of unrealistic expectations, but flourishes in the soil of acceptance. Repetition with intention. You returned. You returned to yourself. You were reborn. You were reborn in the silence of your own soul. These phrases dance inside those who dare to acknowledge their own shadows, and by confronting them, ignite the light that illuminates their child's path. It is a cycle of double healing. She heals herself and by doing so invites the other to be born again. If something within you opened with this video, write in the comments what touched your heart the most. Sometimes sharing also heals. And if you wish to continue on this soul's journey, we are here whenever you want to return. We close this meeting with the certainty that, in revealed pain, dwells the seed of renewed love. May each act of self-care and each word of inner affirmation be balms for the maternal soul and beacons for the child's path, who finally learns the taste of respectful freedom.